Okay, so as everyone is coming in, let me wish good morning or afternoon to all those of you who are joining us from someplace in the United States or Canada, and good evening to those of you who are joining us from someplace in Israel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rabbi Margie Sella, and I am an educator for Women's League for Conservative Judaism, and I want to welcome you all to our first installment of this year's Sichot and Achayot program. This is the third year that we are doing this program. It is a program which is generously sponsored through a grant from Keren Kayemet L'Israel, Masorti Olami, and Merkaz Olami, and we thank them for the funding for the grant. This year's theme is today's theme is helping the stranger, mitzvot, motivations, and methods. So our goal in all three of these workshops is to work towards a better understanding, fostering a better mutual understanding between Israeli Jewish women and Jewish women in the diaspora. I want to thank all of our participants in advance for being flexible during these very, very difficult times. And I am especially grateful to our speakers and participants who are joining us from Israel. Please know that we in Women's League stand firmly behind Israel, and we are here to support you and offer you our strength and our prayers and whatever we can do to lift you up during this very difficult time. Before we begin today's conversation, I would like to introduce to you our Executive Director, Rabbi Ellen Mullins-Fields. She will bring greetings on behalf of herself and our International President, Julia Loeb.
Shavua Tov to everybody. May it be a better week than the last couple of weeks have been. It's wonderful to be with everybody today. I was going to say this morning, where I sit, it's afternoon. And our International President, Julia Loeb, is in transit at the moment. We can now talk about it because she's back in the country. Her entire family didn't know where she went, but she was representing us on the Conference of Presidents and Major American Jewish Organizations mission to Israel. So she is in transit back to Maryland as we speak on an Amtrak train. So she represented us very well. Who knew when we planned this program how much our hearts would be in Israel? We had a different sort of programming and planning this year. Rabbi Sella was fantastic planning all of it. We had it all organized, and we knew that during the Chagim, no one would be thinking about this in Israel. And then we all know what happened on Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. So those of you from Israel who are here, as Rabbi Sella said, we pray for you always. And I'm glad that those who are here. We wanted to get more people, but we were conflicted as to how much to advertise to you since you have so many other things going on. But as we said, it is being recorded, so people can listen to it afterwards. And since Israel is always in our thoughts and our prayers, especially today, I'm going to begin by not only thanking everyone in the state of Israel, but also praying to God to create peace and some way watch over the state of Israel. Avinu Shebashamayim, Tzur Yisrael v'Goalo, Barech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu. Hagen aleha be'evrat chastecha, ufros aleha sukat shlomecha. Ushlach orcha v'amitzcha l'rasheha, tzareha v'yoatzeha. V'taknem be'etzah tova milfanecha. Chazek et yedei miginei eretz kodshenu, v'hanchilem Elohenu Yeshua. V'ateret netzachon te'atrem, v'natata shalom ba'aretz, v'simchat olam liyoshveha, v'nomar amen. And I will do it in English. A prayer for the state of Israel. Avinu Shebashamayim, stronghold and redeemer of the people Israel. Bless the state of Israel, the beginning of our redemption. Shield it with your love, spread over it the shelter of your peace. Guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them, crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy. And let us say, Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Mullins-Fields. Now let us begin with today's program. First of all, as you are probably aware, The program is being recorded and will be available sometime in the near future on the Women's League website for those who were unable to participate today. I also want to let you know that during the course of this evening's program, the chat is open for you to be able to enter questions. All of those questions are going to be monitored by Rabbi Wolens-Fields, and at the end, after all four of our speakers have had an opportunity to share their thoughts with us, we will have a time for Q&A, and at that time, Rabbi Wolens-Fields will be asking some of those questions to all of our speakers. So again, thank you all for being here. We did, as Rabbi Wolens-Fields said, we did debate for a while, should we continue with this program or should we postpone it, and what should we do? And I reached out to all four of our speakers today, and I am grateful to all four of them for agreeing to continue to share their thoughts with us, though of course their words may be and probably are modified from what they had originally planned on sharing with us. Our first speaker today is Rabbi Amy Eilberg, the first woman to be ordained as a rabbi at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. And there are many of us who owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to you for paving the way. She currently serves as the chair of the Racial Justice Subcommittee of the Conservative Movement's Social Justice Commission, and is the chair of Congregation Eitz Chaim's Anti-Racism Impact Committee. She will discuss the halacha of the mitzvah of welcoming the stranger. Rabbi Eilberg.
Well, thank you so much, Margie and Ellen. I thank everyone for being here again, especially our sisters in Israel. Even here, I'm in the U.S. It's hard to even get our minds to go to something to think seriously about anything other than what's happening in Israel. So it takes a little bit of a leap of focus. But as a colleague of mine, the COO of the USCJ, United Synagogue for Conservative Judaism, and of the Rabbinical Assembly, Rabbi Shir Konigsberg, said on a committee meeting about a week ago, of course, our hearts are all in Israel, and we still have tikkun work to do here, where we live. That doesn't go away, even that our hearts are in Israel. So I want to talk about the mitzvah, the famously multiply articulated mitzvah in the Torah, to care for the stranger, to not oppress the stranger, to love the stranger, the marginalized, the oppressed in our midst. And I'd like to talk through some texts with you that are very, very familiar to you all, I'm sure, but to ground our conversation in Torah. And to be clear, since there are, according to some counts, at least 36 times that the Torah says variations of don't oppress the stranger, this will be just, very small fraction of the texts that are out there. Some people say that the mitzvah is actually repeated 72 different times in the Torah, but let's say it's 36 times. Why does the Torah have to repeat? Why is the Torah so insistent on this mitzvah? Why not just say it once? Why does it say it over and over again? And I can't prove this, but my instinct is that it has to be repeated over and over again because it's so hard to practice. There is an instinct in us, as human beings, that evolved through our biological evolutionary development, that when we see an enemy coming over the horizon, we don't assume that they're coming for tea. Our nervous systems, our whole bodies respond as if the person coming from a distance and is an enemy, is a danger, is actually a mortal threat. In fact, our limbic brains, reptilian brains, still have that sort of feeling, even though in most cases in peacetime, that's really not the case. Actually, now that we're in wartime, even those of us who are in the U.S. or Canada, at some distance, I think our that reptilian brain is very much activated. Even though I am sitting in Chicago today visiting my kids and grandson, there's no, as far as I know, there's no moral threat posed to me, and yet an email can come into my inbox, and it uses a different word than I would have liked it to use, and I jump with the same kind of sort of physically, viscerally terrified sort of jump that I might if a bear were suddenly, running in the direction of my grandson. That's simply the way we're built. I've noticed this a number of times, regardless of what your political thoughts are. I've noticed a lot of fighting on email, even among people who basically agree. I mean, obviously, we see a lot on social media, on email, in our inboxes. There's a lot of things that are grossly offensive at this time. But I also see people who actually love each other and are basically in agreement, who start doing the electronic equivalent of screaming at each other because you use the wrong word. And it seems to me that's on a continuum with the commandment not to practice xenophobia, because the sense is, even you use the wrong word, you framed that very, 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 very slightly than I would have. Suddenly you become the enemy. So I think we have, unfortunately, a real-time opportunity to watch how that instinct shows up in us, and how we can bring mindfulness and thoughtfulness to not wage war on our friends and our loved ones and the community members, because waging war on one another doesn't help get the hostages released or help reach our goals. So I want to say, with obvious suggestions, sometimes the enemy coming, very obviously, I don't have to remind you, is sometimes the stranger coming is the enemy, as we know. But I want to talk about two categories of things. This is what I'll have in mind as I go through the text, is the stranger, as the Torah says, the ger yatom ve'almana, the stranger, the widow, and the orphan, the marginalized, the oppressed, the targeted people, the people who generally suffer discrimination in our societies, and also the stranger within our own community. And I'll get to that toward the end of my remarks. So I'm thinking about the immigrant, the refugee, the person of another race or nationality or gender, of a gender self-understanding that we are not comfortable with, or a sexual orientation that we are not comfortable with, or with a political orientation other than our own. Again, that old neurological response may lead us to think that person is my enemy, when actually they're not. They may pose the threat of discomfort based on our own opinions and biases, but we can give far too much power to our the ancient part of our brains, when we allow ourselves to be governed by the ancient assumption that difference necessarily implies threat. Actually, difference also means possibility, opportunity to broaden our lives and our perspectives, opportunities to learn and to build community together. When we're ruled by xenophobia, by instinctive hatred of the stranger, we're deprived of those opportunities. So let's look at some texts. I'll share that on the screen. parents. So again, this is kind of a random or subjective selection of the 36 passages, Torah passages that I could have chosen from. Just some of my favorites. V'ger lo toneh v'lo tilchatzenu ki gerim heitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. You shall not wrong or oppress a stranger. Excuse me, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Do not mistreat the orphan or the widow. It's one of many truly remarkable things about the Torah, about Judaism, about how we as a people reflect on our founding story. We became a nation in bondage in Egypt and then on our way out of Egypt. The lesson of that, the moral of that story, as the Torah might have taught it but did not, was do not ever let yourself as a people fall into that kind of degradation again. That's not the mitzvah that the Torah repeats 36 times. Don't let it ever happen to you again. The mitzvah that's so forcefully and frequently repeated is don't let that happen to other people, because you know how it feels. You know what it is to be the person on the receiving end of discrimination, of hatred, even of genocide. And for that reason, I mean, of course, we want to protect ourselves, but our call as a people, our moral existential call as a people, is to not mistreat others in that way. Again, I'm thinking immigrant, refugee, the political other, and so on. And I'm thinking mostly in American society. I know, with apologies to the Canadians, I have no expertise in the what happens in the public square in Canada. The next verse, "V'ger lo tilchatz ve'atem yedatem et nefesh hager ki gerim heitem be'eretz Mitzrayim." Do not oppress a stranger, for you know the soul of a stranger. You were strangers in the land of Egypt. You know in your guts, in your heart, in your kishkas, even in your reptilian brain, you know what this is like, to have to always fear the in-group, the people with power and privilege, because you know that they will regularly turn on you sometimes in small ways and sometimes in horrific ways. You know what that's like. And so we as the Jewish people must do everything we can not to treat the strangers in our communal midst that way. You could scroll down just a bit, Karen, that'd be great. Leviticus, Ke'ezrach mikem yeh lachem hager hagar itchem ve'ahavta lo kamocha ki gerim heitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as your homeborn. It's literally, the word is Ke'ezrach, as a citizen. I don't know why JPS translates it as homeborn. Maybe citizenship wasn't the same in the ancient world. You shall... Oh gosh, the spacing, there's something weird with the spacing. You shall love each one as yourself. It says, V'ahavta lo kamocha, just like the famous verse in 1918, Leviticus 19:18. It says, love them as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And then it says at the end of the verse, Ani Hashem Elokechem. It's often a kind of coda at the end of important verses, and the rabbis always ask, so, it could have said, Ani Hashem Elokechem, I am God. That could have been at the end of every verse, right? Why is it only at the end of certain verses? Rashi says the reason that the phrase, I am Adonai, your God, appears at the end of this verse is to communicate your God and their God, the stranger's God. I am... The Hebrew puts the I at the end. I am your God and also the stranger's God. So that's a powerful statement. God saying, don't forget that whatever you think of that person, the other in the midst of your community, I'm their God as much as I am your God. And the next one, Deuteronomy, each of these adds just a little bit of a nuance. I think I'll just, for the sake of time, I'll read it just in English. For your God, Hashem, Adonai, is God supreme and Lord supreme, the great, the mighty, the awesome, Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, Vanoah, who shows no favor, takes no bribe, but upholds the cause of the fatherless and the widow and befriends the stranger, providing food and clothing. So you too must befriend the stranger. It's a funny translation. The Hebrew says, again, V'ahavtem et hager. Not don't, the first verse we looked at said, don't oppress the stranger. Now we've seen several times where it says, don't just refrain from oppressing them, but love them because you know them. You too must befriend the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And then one more verse, which has come to be a favorite of mine, not from the Torah, not one that always lands on these lists. In the middle of a verse in Ecclesiastes, I won't talk about the context, but the phrase is just so striking. The third verse of Ecclesiastes, which is the verse about there's a time for everything, time for I'm thinking of the verbs, time for everything, time to be born, a time to die, and so on. Later in that chapter, it says, V'ha Elohim yivakesh et nirdaf. The nirdaf is the one who is pursued, and pursued sometimes has a passionate connotation, as in bakesh shalom v'rodfehu, seek peace and pursue it, but sometimes lirdov has a violent connotation. So here I think it's the latter. God seeks out or really desires or wants to embrace the one who is pursued. So God has a preference here. God has a preference for the person on the other end of hatred and discrimination and othering. So yeah, you can unshare that. Thanks, Karen. So I think I've talked about this in terms of the groups. Perhaps I've forgotten a group that I should have included. Actually, people who are marginalized because of their religions too, I should have said, which I think I didn't. But I also want to talk just for a couple of moments about the internal stranger. And this is probably why I was invited onto this webinar, because Rabbi Ellen and I know that the Women's League has worked very hard over the last number of years, thinking about the work of welcoming and inclusion for Jews who don't always feel welcome in our communities. And the Women's League, along with the Federation of Jewish Men's Clubs, has a wonderful region to talk about work of welcome and inclusion for Jews with disabilities, for Jews who are LGBTQA+, for Jews with families of all different kinds of shapes and compositions, and for Jews of color. So in my work as the chair of the Racial Justice Subcommittee of the Conservative Movement, we've been very active, especially for the last 2 years, learning about the experience of Jews of color in Jewish communities. And their experiences are far worse than I would have known before I became really very active in trying to listen and learn about this. We can and do, unfortunately, if we don't really bring our minds to it intentionally, we can and do other people in our own communities. We can ask, for example, there was a Black person in the shul yesterday, and she and her daughter, it was a Torah for Tots kind of thing. I was there with my grandson. So there was a Black woman and her beautiful little Black daughter, and they were the only non-white people in the room. And I notice, even now that I've been thinking about this so much, that, oh, she's a Black person. And that a question might arise in me. Oh, I wonder, how did she come to be Jewish? Was she born and raised Jewish? Did she convert? Did she whatever? Well, all those years when many of us thought, just to take one example, myself included, that it was just a mark of kindly curiosity to reach out and say, oh, hi, I haven't seen you here before. Are you, how are you Jew? Are you born Jewish? I've learned is quite offensive because it's a way of calling attention. So it's a way of saying, although my intention I think was always positive, it gets received as if I had said, do you really belong here? After all, you're a Black person. The rest of the people here are white. Most Jews in America are white, right? Not to say that any of us had the kind of really malignant intent that my tone just suggested. But we Jews who are white, again, it's complicated to be Jewish and white in America. Obviously, we are sometimes the objects of discrimination, despite the fact that our skin color would normally give us racial privilege. Those of us Jews who are white have a lot to learn about how uncomfortable at best it can be to be a Jew of color in a synagogue, in a Jewish organization. Similarly, Jews with disabilities, Jews who have a different shaped family, the one that in the 1950s and 60s was considered to be standard for Jewish families. So I think the same logic, and with this I close, the very same logic that the Torah uses when it tells us very rigorously, very regularly, very passionately and emphatically, you know what it's like to be on the receiving end of hatred and othering and marginalizing, whether it's beyond your community or within your community. It is your obligation. It is part of the essence of what it is to be a Jew, to do everything you can to reach out to that person and to make them feel not only included, but also welcomed, embraced, and loved. Thanks.
Thank you, Rabbi Eilberg, for those wonderful words. And if I may just add, the kinds of remarks that you were just talking about are sometimes directed not only towards Jews of color and all the categories of Jews that you mentioned, but also Jews within our community who have last names like, oh, I don't know, Sela, names that are not clearly, distinctly Jewish, will often get the same kinds of questions and with the same kind of results. But thank you. I appreciate all of your remarks. Okay, we're now going to hear from two women who are affiliated with HIAS, which is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, the international Jewish nonprofit organization that aids refugees. First, we're going to hear from Sivan Carmel, who is the director of the Israel office of HIAS, and she will tell us about her work as a legal advocate for refugees and also what effects the events of the past 2 weeks have had on her daily activities. And after that, we will hear from Rebecca Kirtzner, the Senior Director of HIAS in the United States, who will speak to us about the organization's mission and worldwide activities on behalf of all refugee populations. Sivan?
Thank you, Rabbi Sela, and thank you to Women's League for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here. I hope you can hear me okay. And hopefully this won't be interrupted by a siren, but if it does, we'll figure it out. I was really glad that this event is still being held. I have to say so many things have been pushed off to an unknown time, a kind of blurry after the war, quote unquote. And who knows when that's going to be. It's a little bit different than after the Chagim, as we always say, when it's kind of clear when that's going to happen. So I can really, from the minute that this event started, I have to say that I can feel the warmth and the support coming from this virtual space, and that we're in together. And I really do feel among sisters. So thank you. So yeah, originally, I guess I planned on talking about our work at HIAS Israel with asylum seekers. But I think I'll focus more really on sharing with you our experience at HIAS Israel from the last 2 weeks since October 7th. I have to say that the team at HIAS were around 20, 21 people, most of us Israelis. We also have some asylum seekers on the team, and some with dual nationalities, American, Canadians, and others. So we're a pretty diverse team. But I have to say everyone was impacted by these events. Either they know a family who had lost a loved one or whose loved one had been taken, abducted, or someone in their family has been called to military duty. It's really hard to be in Israel and not be affected by what is happening and what happened. And this includes all of us as staff. For the first few days, we worked from home. We still are mostly working from home, but I think staff more and more are trying for a few hours to come in. It was really hard, in the first few days to face it alone. I think we're so used to facing crises together, and we're a source of comfort for each other, and just not being able to process this together was really what made it difficult. But we did get together on Zoom. We had a group session with our local psychologist. And really, when you're at home, and if you're parents to kids, then the kids are also home, it's hard in a different way than COVID was. The stress levels are very high. And I found myself often asking, how can I be there for the team? Like, what do they need right now? And a lot of it is just time to process, and to meet a lot virtually as much as possible. We start each meeting with everyone kind of sharing what's on their mind, what are they going through, what's hard right now, clearly understanding that we're not going to be able to, it's not business as usual. But also to give time to volunteer. And I think this is something we started seeing in the first few days. People wanting to get a sense of being part of a community. So going to like a local community center and packing different items to be delivered to people who had to evacuate from the South, or to the military, but really just doing and finding the time to do. And I think giving staff the space to do it and doing it myself. And you really saw different ways of coping with it. Sometimes it's cooking or baking for the residents. Sometimes it's hosting a family in your home. But whatever it is, to feel like you're connected and you're really a part of it. On our clients, also the events had a lot of impact in many different ways. Being a refugee in a country going through war is extremely hard. Many have already been through war, and this is what brought them here, including the Ukrainians that we're helping, but also Eritreans and Sudanese. I think many of our clients from Darfur, the stories I've heard over the years were exactly chillingly similar to what we're hearing. We've heard the accounts we've heard coming out of the south of Israel and the towns and the kibbutzim. That same kind of, going from house to house and the horrible violence that happened there was very much like these testimonies. And I think that also makes many of these refugees so impacted by these events, and seeking mental health support for those who are speaking out. Some are just, kind of processing it on their own. And so helping them get through it and just being in touch, hearing what are their needs, what can we do to continue to support them. And also, I think this is more of like a secondary impact, because many have had to stop working because most of the restaurants are not operating in the same way. So many things have closed. We're seeing it a very similar, like during COVID, when people just can't afford to pay the rent or to put food on the table, and like the beginning of a new humanitarian crisis. And so we're hearing accounts of that as well from all the populations that we serve. And at the same time, with this hardship created by war and by the re-traumatizing, of these events, we're also hearing many refugees, call us and say, what can we do to help? Or not call us, and we just see them, like at the center where we volunteer doing the packing. We see many Eritreans. Maybe you saw these pictures. They usually have the blue shirts, but packing things for the residents who've had to evacuate from the south and from the north. And this kind of mobilizing among the community is amazing. It's not something we've seen so much of before, not the way to help like general society. And it really is very, very inspiring. And we're looking at how much can we do together. HIAS Israel side by side. We're enjoying projects with the asylum seeker community. And I've been thinking a lot these days how this gives whole new meaning to solidarity. Not just solidarity with people, with the Israeli residents and citizens, but also with asylum seekers, with the stranger among us. And I do want to open up parentheses here and say a few words of context about asylum seekers in Israel. As many of you may know, most Sudanese and Eritreans have been here for over a decade, some now 15 years, speak Hebrew, their kids go to school here, and despite all this, they don't have a full durable status. They're not recognized as refugees. They may be protected from deportation, but they don't have access to social rights, to healthcare, even after so many years. And this really became clear during COVID when you saw people just didn't have the same safety nets that Israelis had. It's been going on for years. And despite all this, they still step up at a time of need and stand as one with Israeli society. And so because we're talking about welcoming the stranger, I just want to say from that perspective that the stranger has never been closer. That this war is really making us look again at what it means to belong in a society. And where we're looking at what are we at HIAS Israel doing to respond. So first and foremost, we want to continue to serve the refugee population and really respond both to the general needs that we always do through legal aid, through economic inclusion, through prevention and response to gender-based violence, but also to respond to the specific needs related to this war, which now seems like a really strong need for emergency cash assistance. Some of the people who've had to evacuate from the towns in the south are asylum seekers. Actually, some of the people killed and missing are also asylum seekers. And so helping them trace the missing persons and being in touch with the police is something that we've been doing. And also helping people get out and finding alternative places to live. I think while many state-initiated evacuations help people find hotels and other shelters, this is not the same for asylum seekers. And here we really have to use our networks. And this is true for HIAS Israel and for all our partners on the ground in Israel. Hearing there's a family who left Sderot or Ashkelon and now is looking for a place to stay. And just a lot of WhatsApp messages going back and through until we can find a place for them. And we're seeing more and more of this need. And at the same time, continuing legal aid and advocacy to make sure that the same policies, or as much as possible, can apply to them as well. And I have to say, welcome the stranger has been our motto for years, but also going back in the first few decades of HIAS Israel, which started in 1950, what we were doing in the first few decades is to help Olim, or to help Jews leave our neighboring countries and go to Israel or go to the US. And I think now, again, we're finding ourselves responding to the situation and looking at situations where there's displaced Israelis or evacuated Israelis. And so we're responding also to asylum seekers, but to help Israelis as well. So, and also doing it through partnerships, providing mental health support, MHPSS, humanitarian needs. But it really is all about, being part of a network. This is something that's helped us respond to many different situations in the last few years. We have a pro bono network of lawyers who help with different kinds of cases, and we have a network of employers who participate in the job fair for Ukrainian refugees. And now exactly is the time to go back to these existing networks and see how they can support and how they can help us in our emergency response to the situation. I have to say, for us, the ground shook, not just for us, for the world. It felt like the ground shook on October 7th. In some ways, I feel like a bit like a stranger in my own land, not because I don't belong, just because so many things shifted. And I have to say that the solidarity among Israeli society, including what we're seeing from the asylum seekers, is really the one stabilizing factor that gives me a lot of hope. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sivan, for those wonderful, powerful, inspiring thoughts. And I'm sure that probably our women will have many questions to ask you, but it's amazing to hear about the solidarity that you describe, and again, we our thoughts, our prayers are with you at all times. And now Rebecca Kirtzner.
Hi, thank you so much. I want to just echo Sivan's thanks for having HIAS be part of this program. It's really an honor to address the Women's League of Conservative Judaism. And I'm impressed and really honored that you chose this topic and that you chose to stick with this topic in the past 2 weeks. So I serve as the Senior Director of Grassroots Organizing and Advocacy at HIAS. And my work is really organizing the American Jewish community to care for refugees. And that includes things like leading delegations to Capitol Hill, leading delegations to the US-Mexico border, organizing advocacy campaigns and petitions. And it has almost always been about refugees who are not themselves Jewish and who are not maybe from a very Jewish part of the world. And so it was coming from a place of tikkun olam, and coming from a place of values. And I think that until the past 2 weeks, there's a little bit of distance that came with that, that came from the fact that, thank goodness, Jews were not the ones, we were not at this point in history when we were comprising large percentages of the refugee population. And instead, my job consisted of organizing people to take action for Syrian refugees, Venezuelan refugees, out of our Jewish values. And in the past few weeks, it feels like some of that has changed. And you heard from Sivan about, the direction that the work in Israel is going to mobilize to help displaced Israelis as well. And that recognition that some of that has changed, I don't know, in a way, it kind of feels like our internal organs were removed and squeezed and wrung out and then put back in or something, but just understanding that kind of perspective shift. So I want to talk first about HIAS's work around the world and, our Jewish connection, our connection to the Jewish community. And then I think I want to get really specific and give you all a sense of how actually actively you can be involved in welcoming the stranger. So I'll start by saying that for Jews, standing with refugees, all refugees, no matter their background, is an act of recognition of the commonalities between people, of the humanity, the commonalities with our own stories, honoring both our history and our present, upholding our values. It is an act of welcome, sometimes of courage, and always of love. For me, it honors my namesake, my grandma Becky, who arrived in the 1920s through Ellis Island, my grandpa Jerry, who arrived from Cuba 20 years later, my wife's Holocaust survivor family, and so many HIAS clients that I have met from around the world who have moved from one country to another in an act of bravery, resilience, and dignity. And so I want to thank you all for being part of that. Welcoming the stranger is a mitzvah that is commanded of us more than any other, and unlike most mitzvot, it is listed with a reason, because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. And so because of that, we're supposed to understand, to look inward, to understand that the stranger is equally human, that they are us. We can look to the refugees in our ancient past, just as we can look to our own neighbors and friends who have experienced displacement and came to another place as refugees, to understand that migration is not new. Since the beginning of time, people have moved to new places for survival and for opportunity, heading into an unknown future because they had no other choice. I am so proud to be here representing HIAS together with Sivan. We are an international Jewish refugee agency. We're the oldest refugee agency in the world. And Sivan and I are two of almost 2,000 staff members in more than 100 offices in 25 countries providing aid to refugees. I work on the Jewish community engagement team in the United States, and I am proud to be associated also with HIAS's historic work, helping generations of Jews to come to the United States. We estimate, whether they know it or not, that HIAS supported the families of nearly half of the entire American Jewish community to immigrate to this country in some way throughout the many waves of Jewish immigration. And I'm prouder still to be connected with our current work, serving refugees around the world, regardless of their race, ethnicity, religion, or nationality. We are on the Greek island of Lesbos, serving refugees who have crossed the Mediterranean. We are in cities all along the US-Mexico border. We are in 13 refugee camps in Chad, serving survivors of the Darfur genocide, and more recently, the people who have fled the current situation in Sudan. We are in 10 countries in Latin America, serving people displaced from Venezuela and the Northern Triangle region. And since the start of the war in Ukraine, we have dramatically expanded our work in Ukraine and opened operations in Romania, Moldova, and Poland. And we work in Israel, as you heard, in the office directed by the incredible Sivan Carmel, whose work with Sudanese and Eritrean asylum seekers and Ukrainian refugees in Israel will now expand to provide services to people displaced from the current crisis and war. So the past 8 years, which is how long I've been at HIAS, has given me a bit of expertise in how the American Jewish community has stood with refugees and how we can. Amongst other things, the Jewish community mobilized to stand up for Syrian refugees in 2015 and 2016, rallied at airports against the Muslim and refugee bans in 2017, fought family separation policies at the border in 2018 and 2019, welcomed Afghan refugees in 2021, and shortly after that in 2022, Ukrainians. In recent years, the number of refugees around the globe has increased dramatically. There are now more than 117 million people, 117 million people who have been displaced due to conflict and violence. The numbers are rising precipitously because of new global conflicts and emergencies, but also because of multiplier effects like COVID and climate change, which make people's lives much harder. And also because of a global rise in nationalism that is leading too many governments to shut their doors. There are far too few places for people to go. There is nowhere for people to go in some cases, and there's just far too many countries who do not see it as their role to respond to the greatest humanitarian emergencies of the day, who turn the other cheek, who seal their borders, who blame their country's problems on the most vulnerable survivors of violence who just need their help. The United States, I will say, I would put in that category. We can do so much better as well. We must change course. We can take more leadership than we've taken. Instead of barring people from seeking asylum at the US-Mexico border, instead of deporting, jailing, persecuting asylum seekers, even sending tens of thousands of people straight back to the danger that they fled, we must have a system that is based in order, fairness, and even compassion. This country can do so much better. HIAS now works with 900 synagogues, of course, many of whom are conservative. I will say that you are well represented on that list. More than 3,000 rabbis and countless advocates and volunteers. I am never really surprised at how deeply the Jewish community cares, because it makes sense to me. I think it's an essential part of what it means to be Jewish today, but it doesn't diminish my gratitude and my pride in how seriously we as Jews take this mandate to welcome. Okay, so this session is about how to help, so I will devote the rest of my time to that, to a quick list. In short, we need you. We do. We need every single one of you, as well as the communities you represent. The global need has never been higher, and there's never been more ways for you to show up to that need and to play a role. Okay, so number one, we are recruiting welcome circles. Those are groups of people, 5 to 8 people, who are able to sponsor individual refugee families to come to the United States. We currently work with more than 100 of such groups. Many of them are based in congregations, as they help newly arrived refugees to secure housing, employment, healthcare, public benefits, and more. Number two, we're recruiting advocates. congregations, and groups who want to be part of asking our elected officials for real concrete changes. For example, to ask them to fund global humanitarian assistance, to welcome refugees through the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program, or to reverse course on the policies at the border. We work with those groups to set up meetings with members of Congress, to make asks, to follow up. Members of Congress care what their constituents think. They don't really care what I think. And so joining this program greatly enhances our ability to make an impact. Number 3, we're recruiting volunteers in particular capacities. In New York and DC, we have full volunteer programs supporting our clients. We are recruiting lawyers who are interested in doing pro bono work to support clients who are seeking asylum, who would otherwise be navigating those legal claims alone, since there's no right to representation in immigration proceedings in this country. And then in 26 other cities, HIAS has a resettlement affiliate who may also need volunteer support with projects such as tutoring in English or providing transportation support to appointments. Number 4, we are recruiting, I'm just going to use the term of the day, influencers, people who can, with a single click, help to share a positive message about refugees and encourage others to take action by signing our petitions and our advocacy alerts. Number 5, we're recruiting signatories, communities and rabbis who will simply add their names to our efforts, and that alone increases our strength. So we have a sign-on called the Welcome Campaign, which is for congregations, and we have a clergy council, which just launched earlier this year. And then lastly, we're recruiting donors who can help us to provide and care for refugees around the world. This week in particular, our focus is on fundraising for a response in Israel. And then I would also encourage you to donate to our general fund, which will be used where needed, such as for a response in Chad, serving people displaced from the emergency situation in Sudan. There is so much to be done. There is so much to be done. And I hope that that statement is actually more empowering than it is overwhelming, because there are ways that you can help. With global numbers of displacement on the rise, it can be so easy to feel like anything that we do is a drop in the bucket. But Judaism teaches us not to see this as 117 million people, but rather as one person and another person, and another person, and another person, each person equally deserving of rights, each person equally and infinitely holy. While the change must happen at the systemic level with policies and protections for large groups, it must also happen at the individual level at the same time. And lastly, I just want to say that this is an awful and impossible time in the Jewish community. So I've been sitting on this call feeling like I just want to send hugs to all of you. And I just want to thank the Women's League again for prioritizing this program. I think there is no better time to talk about the shared themes of humanity and displacement, of need, of leadership, of resilience and strength. I want to encourage any of you, please feel free to reach out and be in touch if you feel that your community may be able to support in this moment. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rebecca. I hope, I thank you for offering us some very, very concrete suggestions of things that we can do. And I would request if you could possibly send that list to me so that we can share that with our members, so that people know exactly what kinds of things they can be doing to help right now. And I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I would love to do that. That would be fantastic. Thank you for that.
Okay, terrific. All right. Our final speaker for today is Beth Steinberg, the co-founder and director of the Shutaf inclusion programs in Jerusalem, and the 2017 recipient of the Sylvan Adams Nefesh B'Nefesh Bonei Tzion Prize in the community nonprofit category. She is going to speak to us about her experience as an Olah, her advocacy work on behalf of young people with disabilities, and also how her life in Israel has been affected by the events of the last 2 weeks. Beth?
Thank you so much. It's really great to be here. I'm so pleased to be part of this group and taking part in this important conversation. 2 weeks ago, Sivan said it. We were all waiting for the year to begin. The holidays were coming to an end. In my case, in my work, we were waiting to gather with our Shutaf participants, our teens and our young adults with disabilities, with whom we meet with all year round at our programs. We were waiting to start all of our inclusion education work, which is both in Israel and abroad. I was waiting to travel in order to fundraise for needed support for all the work that we do here in Jerusalem. Well, that didn't happen. The world sort of shifted on its axis on October 7th. When I thought about that theme of being a stranger in a new land or taking on new things, it seemed so poignant given, of course, Jews being strangers wherever they might be in the world at so many different times in our history. And it's something that, like, since that Shabbat of Simchat Torah, that I've thought about so much. Like, what does that mean? Where do we sit? And listen, I think that here in Israel, I'm glad to be here. That the horrors, though, of what happened 2 weeks ago remind me that even in my own country, in our Jewish home, our supposed place of safety and refuge, not everyone wants us to be here, or not everyone wants to make steps forward so we can all live together. And how can we get past those basic problems and Israel's ability to exist and live in peace with our neighbors? And there is just so much work to be done. And then I think, but first, let's bring all the captives home. It's the thing that I think about day in and day out. We all are connected to all the recent events abroad. You're connected in your own ways. We're certainly connected. It's a small country. And whether you've attended funerals or gone for Shiva calls, or you're volunteering, or you're just agonizing, it's a lot. And I always think about it, like here in Jerusalem, like I live together with my neighbors. I go to the gym at Ramat Rachel. I meet up with people in the hospital. If you go to the doctor's office, to the mall, to the grocery store, we live together. Just this morning, I shared this earlier. I had a really amazing conversation with someone I've known for a long time. He's got 5 kids, lives in East Jerusalem. He's a citizen, an Arab citizen. He works for the owners of an upstairs apartment in my building. We see each other all the time. But today, we looked at each other. He said, "How are you?" I said, "Okay." I said, "How are you?" He said, "How are your children? Anybody called up?" I said, "No." I asked how his kids were. He shared that his daughter is very frightened. We stood and talked for a really long time. We covered everything from how he feels as a second-class citizen in Israel to politics. He voted for Bibi. I disagreed. He said, "Okay, not anymore." But he said to me, when this is over, he said, "I think this will be the last war and that there's a light at the end of the tunnel." So, as you say here, you'll say, halavai, right? Like, I really hope so. But right now, I feel very fearful for the present and the future. But then I think back to how I got here. And what I wanted to share with you was a little bit about how I got here. So here's this moment. Let me see if I can share my screen properly, where I get to show you some pictures of my story, my family's story, because it really is a family story. There it is. Okay. But I want it to be in a full screen. Is it a full screen, or I can't tell because I'm looking at it? Does anyone want to tell me? It's not so tragic if it's not a full screen. Okay. So I'll start at the top. That's my father, Rabbi Theodore Steinberg. He was a conservative rabbi. He spent most of his career on Long Island. When he retired early at 64, he made Aliyah with my mother, finally living in Israel as he always had dreamed. And he's the reason that my entire immediate family, my brother, my 2 sisters, in addition to my parents, moved here. It was a process that began in 1983 with my oldest brother and was fully realized when we shocked the family and came in August of 2006, myself, my husband, and my 3 kids, during that very painful summer of the Second Lebanon War and the disengagement from Gaza. My father believed deeply in the Zionist dream and in the hope and healing that the founding of the State of Israel in those terrible years, right, following World War II and the Holocaust offered. And his rabbinate was embedded in those ideas, from Israel to observing Shabbat and taking part in Jewish life. I've thought so much about this in the last weeks. What would he have said about what happened 2 weeks ago? What would my mother have said she died more recently in 2021 at the age of 91, about the recent events of October 7th. Here's there we are. We've just gotten off the plane. We look pretty terrible. We were tired. It was a day that Nefesh B'Nefesh decided to bring in 3 planes at once. They never did that again. When I moved to Israel at the age of 44, I wasn't 25. It was the culmination of years of thinking and imagining living here. My husband would say he moved for the weather in Jerusalem, not in August. I'd say I moved for the coffee. You know, in Israel, everyone's a barista. You could always get a good cup of coffee. But I definitely am here because it is what I always wanted to do. And I want to honor the help we had from Nefesh B'Nefesh when we moved. And I'm here with you today because of my cousin Mark, who's been on the Nefesh B'Nefesh team, supporting Aliyah all around the world for many years. But what made us really come? Well, standing under the chuppah at my younger sister's wedding, here's a picture of the whole chamula, all of us, the whole tribe, shall we say. You might know my sister if you read Arts and Culture at the Times of Israel. Whenever you're reading a happy article, just look, the byline is Jessica Steinberg, that's my sister. I felt sad that I would miss her life that was unfolding here now. Marriage, children, perhaps. Her husband had 2 daughters, getting to know them. And my husband and I looked at each other and said, well, maybe now's the time. And Israel welcomed us. Don't get me wrong, moving across the ocean is not without its complications. You are a stranger, even if your Hebrew is good. I had family and friends nearby who already lived here, but I had to find my own way with work and life, let alone what shul to choose. There's so many. You could go to a different one every Shabbat. Every Shabbat, you probably would never run out here in Jerusalem. 3 years into, of course, we had to leave, of course, family and friends behind. We moved from downtown Brooklyn, from the King Street Synagogue, if you know the downtown Brooklyn area, where we were really happy members of that community for many years, let alone family and friends, obviously. 3 years into our adventure, our middle son, Gabe, said, well, didn't we say we were trying this out for, and we're going to reevaluate, meaning maybe go back to New York? And I said to him, I'm just not, I need more time. I need more time to understand. And already by 3 years in, so much had started for me, including Shutaf, which I'll tell you about in a minute. Meanwhile, what my son does not remember is by 3 years, he'd already met his now wife. They're expecting their second child in December, and they live down the block from us, which is an amazing thing. While I'm a bit frozen in place since October 7th, my life is full. And it's interesting, the words that have come up during the course of this conversation today, and we use the word inclusion a lot. So here is the work that started for me in 2007, a year after I had moved. Shutaf inclusion programs. And by the way, the kid on the right, the baseball hat, that's my son, although it is some years ago. I co-founded Shutaf with my friend and colleague Miriam Avraham in 2007. It was less than a year since we had moved. We're both parents to children, now young adults with Down syndrome. And we really wanted our kids to have camp, just like we'd experienced when we were Jewish kids growing up, both of us in the New York area. We wanted a quality and inclusive camp experience with trained and mentored staff and just so much more. And while the camping world continues to develop in Israel, it was fairly undeveloped at the time in 2007. It still isn't great if you're a kid, teen, or young adult with some kind of special need. So year-round, we do all sorts of programs. We have our biggest project is Camp in the Summer in August, which is 3 weeks. May not sound like much to you, but generally August is a month without much activities, whether you're a kid with a disability or without. So just a little bit about what we do. And we also started, what I always say is we started as a modest, let's say, social justice startup, but we've become a year-round program. We serve more than 250 participants, children, teens, and young adults from about the age of 6. And we've just started going over the age of 30 because we have young people who've been with us really since the beginning. And we continue to try to address how can we continue to serve as our community grows and has different needs. And we're also training and educating with the Shutaf Inclusion Guide, which is something I'm really deeply proud of. And I'm also really proud that this project is in Hebrew, in English, and okay, we're definitely delayed now because of everything that's going on, but Arabic also. We have all the resources that we have put together in Hebrew and English. We have filmed videos, we filmed them in Arabic, we have every resource has been translated, and it's a long process for us to get the website fully operational in a third language, but it's a project that's well on its way, and we look forward to being able to reach out to the Arab community locally and beyond locally and say, look, these resources will help you just like they helped us. And they're free. All of our resources are open source. Our feeling really came out of a Jewish communal feeling of it is time to push harder and invest the time we need to step up our abilities and have the resources that will help us do this work better. There is still not enough inclusion that happens, certainly in Jewish communal life, let alone beyond. And that's like to us something that's really important. And by the way, within our program, and here's just some pictures of happy kids at camp this last summer, kids and young adults, this picture of young adults on the lower right as well as on the upper left are two different work programs that we also have at camp for both our teens and for our young adults with diverse needs. We're committed to the greater community and to participants from different backgrounds. We've had Arab children with disabilities. We reach out to all the local schools in West Jerusalem, and anyone can come. We are not about politics or religion. We are about inclusion. But now I got to say, the future has never felt so unsettled to me. And COVID wasn't easy for us, and we were still recovering in many ways. We're a small organization. I was listening to, HIAS. Oh my God, you guys do so much amazing work. It's really, really inspirational to hear. There are 7 of us. We don't all work full time. One staffer is in the Army. Another's husband is down south. She has an 8-month-old. The rest of us, we're still trying to figure it out. How can we serve? Thankfully, we learned a lot during COVID. That helps us now. But we don't have a safe space or a bomb shelter. We really can't run programs in person. We're looking into maybe running programs somewhere else. But who's to say that our participants will feel comfortable coming, safe enough to come? Will their parents feel comfortable? There's a lot to think about, and we don't have enough staff. So it's complex. We're working online for now. This week, we're going to be delivering some care packages to every family. We just want to be able to tell them, we know this is hard, and it's really hard if you're a family who has a child or a young person with a disability. My son went back to his program last week, but he's one of the few. He's 26. His program offered something simple, just if you live at home still, he still lives at home. If you live in an apartment, let's say with other peers in his particular organization, they're running some programs at the apartments. But essentially, people don't have jobs suddenly. They don't have a sense of safety. My colleague, she went down south to the desert with her daughter. She has a son who lives in the Arava desert, and that was a much quieter place for her daughter, who has a lot of anxiety issues to be right now. Everyone has to make the decisions they need. We're also almost entirely privately funded. That's a longer story about the complexity of getting government funding and the criteria that limit real inclusion programs here in Israel. And that means at a time when donors are giving frantically, and we are grateful for helmets and ceramic vests, for food for soldiers, helping devastated southern communities, all of this so desperately needed. But will any help come to programs like ours, or we won't exist to serve our community when this is all over? And believe me, people with disabilities and their special program needs, they don't go away, war or no war. I was going to say that I've been writing a lot about my experiences as well as my sister. And if you're a Substack reader, you can look us up on Substack. And I had a piece even just the other day where I thought a lot about people with disabilities and how they're affected, in particular, because we knew there are captives who have different kinds of diverse needs. And that felt very painful for me to think about, as I even watch how Akiva has related to all that has been going on. Anyway, if anyone wants that information, I can tell you later. And then a happy thing. What else do I do? Just 2 months ago, in late August, I finished a run of Julius Caesar. If you're ever in Jerusalem in August, look for Theater in the Rough, a project I started with my son and a friend in 2010. Yep, Shakespeare, outside, in English, in Jerusalem. Shutaf was very small when this project started. Now I'm in this very happy moment of my summer is the most intense time of my year because we've got camp for 3 weeks and the planning and the preparation and just having camp. And this, which is 9 performances, close to 2,000 audience members, it's this kind of festival atmosphere of Shakespeare here in Jerusalem. And like Shutaf, it's about access and affordability and engagement in the public space. And I love it because we're in a public park. The shows happen right behind the King David Hotel, and everyone stops by to look. And that means an Arab family who came in to have a picnic, religious families who don't know a lot about Shakespeare, tourists from all over the world, and locals who just hunger for their little piece of Shakespeare in a Jerusalem park. So much to be grateful for. And, you know, I have this theory, just to kind of close it up shop, about Aliyah and innovation, and that there are so many interesting projects happening in this country, started by friends and colleagues who moved from other places. And what I often think about it, this is like a research project one day when I got a little minute to think about such matters, that unmoored from your junk mail, right, and your previous responsibilities, and also maybe you're still finding your career in a new country, or you're dealing, or there was a societal issue that bothered you in your previous country, but you weren't ready to kind of make that change. But here in Israel, there really is that daring do kind of attitude, like what Sivan said, the volunteering that's been going on. What can people do? What do you need? When can I do it? You want to change something? Vakasha, go ahead and change it. That's such an Israeli attitude, and that's why there are more than 40,000 nonprofits at any given time here in this country, whether they're all in operation or not. And whether every project lasts forever, they represent a feeling that anyone can make a difference. And that gives me some hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, for your wonderful and inspiring words. And I want to thank all of our speakers today. Certainly, we have learned that welcoming the stranger has many different ramifications and many different formats in which we can fulfill this mitzvah. So we're going to turn now to the question and answer session. Rabbi Wollensfields will be asking the questions of our presenters. So Karen, if you can put all of our speakers on at the same time with Rabbi Wollensfields, so that we can do the Q&A session.
So any of the comments I got and responses weren't actually questions, they were comments. So one person said that her daughter is adopted from China and she hates when people come up to her and say, "Are you Jewish?" You have to be cognizant of that. All Jews don't look alike. Look at all of us around here. We don't look alike. Another person said this isn't the time to turn our backs. And remember that we all are coming from different places around North America and Israel as well. Many of us have never lived, this is my commentary, just so you know. Many of us have not lived through what Israel is living through right now. We've heard about the process from afar. If you get my Shabbat message, or if you don't, tell us. If you read my Shabbat message, I spoke very much from the heart to remember that not all of Palestinians are Hamas, and not all of Hamas are Palestinians. I take that back. Well, I don't know about that part, but not all Palestinians are Hamas, and we need to remember that when we think about this, which is very difficult to think about, really difficult to think about. So that's something I've been toying with since my friends were killed in 1996. So the question came from one of our scholars, and she can just text me to tell me if she wants me to mention who it is. She's quoting Sanhedrin, so the Talmud. In the beginning of the question is, how do we deal with the conflicting idea that in Judaism, the one who kills you is the one who kills him is moral rule that means that a person's allowed to defend himself and save his life at the cost of the life of the person who endangers him as self-defense. This rule is meant either in relation to the threatened person or in relation to a third person who can proceed and kill the person who wants to kill another person. Just remember, I didn't write this. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin 72a says, Rava says, what is the reason for this halacha concerning a burglar who breaks into a house? He explains, there's a presumption that a person does not restrain himself when faced with losing his money, and therefore this burglar must have said to himself, if I go in and the owner sees me, he'll rise up against me and not allow me to steal from him. And if he rises against me, I'll kill him. And the Torah states a principle. If someone comes to kill you, rise and kill him first. Im ba lehargecha Hashkem lahargo. So I was asking how we can phrase that in terms of the stranger and what we're dealing with right now in terms of self-defense. And I'm just looking to see how much more I have here. And that we still have to remember that we are humans and all of us are human beings. And I was going to ask Amy Eilberg to add her remarks, but I just want to say one thing that I spoke to. I see many of our women from the Florida region when this first started. The week was Parashat Bereshit, and we're taught that we're created B'Tselem Elohim in God's image. And each person, no matter how evil or how good we are created in God's image. So as we see such incredible evil in our lives, we're also have that tension of how we all created B'Tselem Elohim, and also have these 36 or 72 phrases about strangers. So my mentor, Rabbi Eilberg.
Well, I'm just going to follow you, Rabbi Ellen. I absolutely believe that the people of Gaza are human beings, just like I am and just like you are. I desperately hope for the day when we, I'm sure this is going to come out quite right, that we have the luxury of thinking of them and asking of all the people, treating all the people of Gaza as human beings. Right now, we are in a situation of mortal threat. And as the questioner said, quite rightly, there is a principle. We are not a pacifist tradition. There is a principle of the permissibility of self-defense in Jewish law. And we are precisely, someone. What is more complicated in Jewish law is whether we're permitted to commit acts of revenge. But what for sure is clear is if we have reason to believe that the people on the other side would be ready to come and slaughter us again, which is a very reasonable assumption as we think about Hamas in Gaza, then there's absolutely a Jewish principle on the permissibility of rising in self-defense. Now, I don't have the text in front of me. After that text that you quoted, there's also a piece about not doing more harm than you have to prevent them from killing you. So it's above my pay grade at this point to talk about how to prosecute this war in a way that doesn't do unnecessary harm to civilians. It's an agonizing question, and I know that Tzahal and the Israeli government are rightly agonizing over that question. But those two things that you named, I think, simply stand in tension. It's both true that the people on the other side are human beings. I'm not aching for the people who, I'm not praying for the souls of the terrorists who slaughtered us, right? But the people in Gaza are human, and we do need to remember that, and we do need to protect ourselves against mortal dangers. So there's no easy answer to how to do that.
Thank you. As always, beautifully stated from you. Thank you. So there are a few different questions here. I think this was probably for actually everyone. Chutzla, North America, outside of North America, how your projects have been affected with Arab participants. And another question was how, and actually that might be how those from the Palestinian community were part of your projects even before this. And I'm adding that part. And another question was, I'd love to create a program on today's topic for our sisterhood. Is there an outline or a template to which we can refer resources? So I could say one thing, Rabbi Eilberg's sources were sent no, they weren't yet sent out, but we can post them, right, Rabbi Eilberg? And if HIAS or Beth, if you have any sources as well that we can add. And once this is edited, the video will be on our website, and also how those from America and North America registered, it's going to be on our website, the recording as well. So Tova, you can use that as a resource. So do you remember my questions from the beginning?
I mean, I guess I can answer for like our programs and stuff. I mean, essentially we thought a lot about the whole question of mixing population. Well, actually, we didn't think about it at all. We started off in a very organic kind of way, and then saw how good it was to bring kids from different backgrounds and with diverse needs, especially in the first like year or two. We had a participant who came from Abu Ghosh very early on, meaning we would put out flyers in all the schools that we essentially served in Jerusalem, in West Jerusalem, and Arab kids with disabilities go to schools for kids with special needs too. So there were a couple of families who came. What we began to understand was that in order to step into that space more, we would had to, quite frankly, it was an issue of funding, find the money more to be able to have a social worker who was bilingual or trilingual in that case, to find a way to reach out to the families so that they would know it was a safe place for their kids to come. I mean, the few kids who came to us because they found out about it like anybody else found out about it, or from a friend or from another parent, we welcomed them. There was no problem. But not every family is going to feel comfortable coming into it's hard enough maybe sending their kid to a school which is primarily Jewish in West Jerusalem if they live in East Jerusalem. For camp, they're probably saying to themselves, this just sounds too complicated. How would I really figure it out? How would I vet it properly? How would I feel comfortable with my kid going maybe during the off season, during vacation? So it's an area that I will say that culturally we've always been very, very mixed. Kids really come from very diverse backgrounds, religious and secular. You do not see that in Jerusalem. We are a very mixed kind of program. We have kids from like Russian backgrounds. Maybe they're Jewish, maybe they're not. I've never asked. It's not important to us. On the Arab side, it's complicated, and we didn't want to be what's the word in English? What's dukiyum?
Coexistence.
Because we don't want to be we want it to be an inclusion program. Coexistence is an integral part of the work we do, but we didn't want to necessarily say, oh, this is now. And then also we said to ourselves, if the kids didn't share a common language, which we know is a problem in this country, well, then how would they really have fun together past a certain age? So again, we continue to share the program in every way possible, welcome people in when they come in, let them know this is a place that they are welcome, regardless of their cultural background. I hope that actually with the inclusion program, the inclusion resources moving forward in Arabic, because it was so interesting finding someone to even film in Arabic, all of that, that's a separate story. Like, I actually feel that gives us an opportunity maybe to share the work more widely and let people know we care about each area of local society. But funding is our challenge. So it remains, that's really the truth. If you don't have the money, you can't always do everything you want to do.
I'm happy to add a little from our perspective. So in our legal aid program, and I mentioned the populations we work with, I mentioned Eritreans, Ukrainians, Sudanese. There's also Palestinians, not a large group, mostly from the West Bank, LGBTQ plus, and women at risk of gender-based violence, whether in the territories or even still in Israel. And there we help also like finding protection in Israel, but also working with UNHCR, looking at resettlement options. For them, it's a terrible, terrible time. They're even more vulnerable. They can't really go out and work. They're hiding. And just facing a lot of different threats on the outside. So we're also in touch with them just to see how we can support very, very basic things, and if there are any ways to expedite resettlement. But I think that's the most direct way and that our clients are affected.
Say we had a comment that every time the IDF goes in, they try not to do more harm by calling off a bombing where they see children. And of course, the IDF also spends warnings ahead of time. The morality is the highest value that the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, holds to not harm civilians. There was one question also that really, thank you for your question about the differentiating between a group of people and a terrorist organization. Well, that's my commentary. Peaceful Palestinians versus inhumane Hamas. You know, that's not a question for us to actually respond to. I don't think there's a way to truly know that at all. If someone wanted to give to HIAS Israel, how do we distinguish that donation versus HIAS in general? Rebecca, would you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'll actually use that as an opportunity to post a number of links in the chat. I'll go ahead and put the Israel link to donate to Israel, but I'd like to, if it's okay, share a few of the other ways to take action that I mentioned, just so that you have all of that information in the chat. So I'll put that right there now so that you can have it. And thank you to whoever asked that question. I appreciate that. Also, there was another question that was asked. You know, I know we're all being asked to give money every which way. In our, I think in my weekly Words of Torah, I gave an example of different places to donate to. The Mussar movement has an emergency fund. The Schechter Institutes, which is part of our Torah fund, at this point, they're in dire need as well. So we're within our own conservative movement, Mussar, there's a lot of ask going on. HIAS, of course, as well. We're being torn thin, and I think that every bit of money that we can give, if you can give a little bit, remember, I'm sure we all had those grandparents that had millions of envelopes on Pesach and would give $5 for each, just so they gave to each person. Those $5 or $1 for each adds up to each different organization. So thank you so much, and look at the Women's League Week that we will be continuing putting in information about Israel and where we can donate to. And Karen, if you can copy all of these, what's going into the chat, so we can put that in the weekly newsletter that we have. Sure.
And I'm going to turn over to Rabbi Sella, who has organized an amazing program, and thank you to all of our speakers today and everybody participating, and we pray for all of you.
Thank you, Rabbi Wollens-Fields. Thank you once again to all of our speakers, to Amy, Sivan, Rebecca, and to Beth. Wonderful perspectives we heard from all of you. And the program, I think, ended up turning out to be so much more even than we had planned or hoped for in the first place. And I thank you all for sharing your words with us. Before we conclude, I want to invite you to our next workshop, which is going to take place on Sunday, November 19th. And that time we will be addressing the topic of homelessness and food insecurity. I want to thank all of those on my committee who helped plan today's program. And those people include Rabbi Ellen Wollens-Fields, our executive director, our international president, Julia Loeb, WLCJ Israel Chair, Ann Greenbaum, WLCJ Education Chair, Kathy Swerdlow, WLCJ Israel Liaison, Diane Friedgut. A huge thank you to our very, very, very talented tech person, Karen Belena, without whose expertise this program would not have run so smoothly today. And so we are going to finish up with one last thing. Again, in honor of our beloved state of Israel, I'd like to introduce to you Cameron Fields, daughter of our Rabbi Ellen Wollens-Fields.
I think Karen is going to be putting the words up as well. This was very last minute. Thank you, Rabbi Eilberg for suggesting this, and Cameron happens to be home and knows how to sing it. So.
Achaynu v'achotenu kol beit Yisrael, Achaynu v'achotenu kol beit Yisrael, hanetunim b'tzara uv'ashivya, ha'omdim beyn bayam ubeyn bayabasha. Hamakom irachem aleihem v'yotzihem mitzara livracha u'me'afel leora shibud legeula hashra bagala uvizman kariv.
And as you could see, we made it egalitarian. Our brothers and sisters, the whole house of Israel, who are in distress and captivity, who wander over sea and over land, may God have mercy on them and bring them from distress to comfort, from darkness to light, from slavery to redemption, now swiftly and soon. And let us all say, Amen.
Amen. Amen. Again, thank you all. Toda Rabah.